Welcome back, guys. Chris here, and in this video, we're going to be talking about potential salaries for various roles and positions related to NetSuite. This is a video I've wanted to make for a very long time. I've gotten asked about it a lot, and I finally took the time to go through and actually survey a lot of people I know to get a very close approximation to what kind of salaries you might have as a potential. I do want to give a few disclaimers out the gate, though. First off, I am going to be making this video in relation to the US. I know a lot of consultants are from Canada. I'm not as familiar with those rates, the currency difference, etc. So I'm just going to be speaking to the United States. And in addition to that, take this video with a grain of salt. Like I said, I surveyed a lot of people, so I know that the figures I'm going to be giving here are accurate for certain situations. There are so many different situations that can occur. It can be what company you're dealing with, skill level. A consultant with 2 years of experience can be incredibly good, and a different consultant with 2 years can be terrible. It really depends. How much was that person arguing for their salary and negotiating that, and also what region that person's from. If someone gets a consulting job in New York City, they're going to get paid a lot more than someone getting a consulting role in Mississippi. Take it with a grain of salt. Understand that this is a ballpark range. You may not be able to get as much, or in some cases, you might be able to get significantly more. So just think with it as a benchmark that you can compare to. So with that in mind, let's start off with, we're going to take this by role, and I want to start off with the administrator role. Everyone wants to talk about consultants, but frankly, there's just so many opportunities for administrator roles because if you think about it, there are some 40,000 clients that are on NetSuite. And generally speaking, every company will need one, if not more, administrators. So if you compare that to, let's say, a consulting role, where there's really only maybe 100 or 200 different consulting companies, there's just so much more opportunity in terms of those admin roles. So what kind of salary can you look at when you're going for an admin role? Now, when it comes to admins, and you'll see when I get to the consulting side of things, what breaks up and differentiates that price range. If you're working for a very small company or a company that's maybe not doing so well, or just puts less focus on their system and doesn't grant it as much importance, you might find that that role is earning significantly less. And for some larger companies where the admin role or the senior admin role is a pretty coveted role, you could see significantly more. But generally speaking, I would say administrators tend to get between 80,000 on the low end and 120, getting closer to the high end. And even amongst that pretty large range, I would say it's very common to fall somewhere between 90 and 100,000. That's quite common. I've seen a lot of administrators fall in that region. Again, smaller companies may only be able to spend maybe $70,000 on their administrator. And for some very large companies, potentially you'll see it go over 120, but that's pretty uncommon. You'll generally fall just under that six-figure mark. Now, in terms of what really makes that difference and why you see that range, it comes down to the company itself, because when it comes to administrators and companies looking for administrators, they're not so much looking for how many years of experience. Like, it doesn't really matter if you have 5 years of experience or 10 years of experience and a million more certifications. A company's going to either deem that you are qualified to be their admin or not. So they're just going to make that judgment call. And depending on whether you fit and you're the best choice, they're going to hire you, and they're going to have their amount that they're willing to pay you for that role. It's not like when we get to, you'll see with consulting roles, where an admin with 2 years of experience might get paid one thing, and an admin with 7 years of experience gets paid something very different. Really, where that difference of experience will come into play is the 7-year admin might just get the opportunity to get the job as the admin for this company that does pay $110,000, while that second consultant with only 2 years of experience didn't get the job, and they had to go to another company and get a job that maybe that company was only willing to spend, let's say, $85,000 for their admin. So that's kind of how that breaks down, is just, do you get the role or do you not, depending on the company and how much they're willing to pay. So that's admins. Now let's move on to consulting. And I want to break it down because there's so many different categories of consulting. First off, let's take it by who is hiring you and focus on, first off, Oracle NetSuite because it makes the most sense. Now, just an initial disclaimer, I've said this in many other videos, but the way that Oracle NetSuite handles their consultants, their system, you could say, is they hire a lot of new people, or I should say young people, especially straight out of college. They'll hire these guys, they'll train them up over a period of a few years, they'll get them used to it, they'll get them working, billable hours, etc. And then generally speaking, after a few years working Oracle NetSuite, some people will just switch careers, but a lot of people will then move on from Oracle NetSuite to what are called partner consulting firms, alliance partners, solution providers, etc., because the pay tends to be better there. So they'll start off with Oracle NetSuite, and it's not to say that they leave Oracle NetSuite because they don't like it. I've talked to dozens of different people who have gotten their career start with Oracle, and I've only heard good things about them being an excellent initial employer. But generally speaking, when it comes to the pay as a consultant, it is on the lower end of things. And it's just understood. The system is bring in the new guys, they get trained up, they get skills, and then they move on to higher pay in other opportunities with other companies. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the different types of consultant. So obviously starting off, you have your entry-level consultant. This is someone who maybe finished business school, they managed to get through the interviewing process, they looked promising, so Oracle NetSuite hires them. And pretty uniformly, the starting pay for a brand new, completely inexperienced consultant is $70,000. There can be small fluctuations to that, but they don't want to get too crazy with that because they have so many people coming in. They kind of want everyone to be on that same pay scale. So it's very common. You're going to hit somewhere around $70,000. And again, little differences on region sometimes, but you'll hit there. Once you've been on board for, let's say, 1 to 2 years, you're generally graduated up to being what's called a staff consultant, which their concept of experienced consultants is a little different than mine and most consultants in the ecosystem. I would still consider that an absolutely new consultant if you've only got less than 2 years of experience. But they then go, okay, you're now a staff consultant, you're not brand new. And then you make a jump, generally speaking, another $10,000. So you might hit up to $80,000. And then, again, these are in Oracle's viewpoints. Then you move up to what's called a senior consultant in their view, and that hits probably around the $90,000, maybe $95,000 range. So that would be someone who has, let's say, 3, maybe 4 years of experience. As soon as you start going over 4 years of experience, it's just not common for people to stick around with Oracle NetSuite that long in those types of roles. It's not to say you'll never see it. There are plenty of people that will, but I would say the majority of people have either moved on or just simply switched jobs entirely. So those guys that are getting 4 or 5 years especially, you're really going to start to see them jump ship onto another consulting company. But before they leave, they can often be at that $90,000, $95,000 range. Some consultants will move up. It's kind of a pyramid effect, right? You're going to get lesser and lesser people moving up, sort of like the military to that degree. And those guys who do move up to, let's say, more managing consultant roles where they actually have a team underneath them, they can then jump up to, let's say, 100, 110,000. That tends to be really the cap that you'll hit unless you move into entirely different types of roles. If you're still technically a consultant, that's kind of the cap that you're going to hit on there. Now, there can be exceptions to that, and there is one in particular that comes to mind. Now, this is not a common role and probably not a role that anyone watching this video is going to end up filling, but just so you're aware of it, there's a role called a solution consultant, or that's at least what Oracle NetSuite calls them. You might also hear them referred to as pre-sales consultants. I just call them demoers because that's what they do. They're not necessarily doing your implementation. They're the guys where a new client or a prospective client is looking at NetSuite, and this is the guy that's going to sit down with them and is going to demo the system to them, especially kind of configuring it to match what that client would want, walking them through it, and in a way almost doing like a little bit of a sales pitch on this is what NetSuite could do for you. So they're a funny mix of almost half salesperson, half actual consultant. And it is a role that you might consider just any functional consultant would be able to do. But in the reality is, it is a role that requires a lot of finesse. It's not like you have a crazy deep knowledge of the system. In fact, they oftentimes just don't care to know every little detail about the NetSuite system because they don't have to, but they have a very, very grounded general understanding and generally a wide understanding, and they have an excellent ability to navigate people through demos and make them feel comfortable with the system. So that is a role that I wouldn't even say it's highly coveted, because it's not like, can you squeeze your way into it? It's just, are you capable of doing it or not? And if you are, the few people that can pull off those roles, and it is few and far between, you can see anywhere from $40,000 to $50,000 additional a year. So for example, when we were talking about, let's say, a senior consultant role, they might make, let's say, $95,000. You could take a good pre-sales consultant, that person might be making $150,000. That would not be out of the realm of possibility at all. I've even seen ones that make significantly more than that. So that is a very, very unique role. It is a specialist role that has a completely different range of pay, not just with Oracle NetSuite, but other companies as well. So again, it is an exception, but a rare role, and one that most people are simply not able to do. So that's the Oracle NetSuite side of things. Now let's move on to what I call the partner consulting agencies. So these are the alliance partners, the solution providers. That might be RSM, Myers-Holem, any one of those companies. There's dozens and dozens, and actually hundreds technically in total. The rule of thumb, when you're looking at these other partner companies, generally speaking, they're going to pay anywhere from 10 to 35% more, depending on the role, that you would see from Oracle NetSuite. And that can fluctuate. I generally have more experience or more familiarity talking to some of the more established, prestigious companies. So I tend to see 30 to 35% as a common thing. But there's, of course, lots of companies that are smaller. They might only have 10 consultants on the team, and they're not able to pay their consultants that much because it's a relatively small agency. So for those companies, you might only see a 5 or 10% increase in pay. And I'm sure there's even consulting companies that they really offer comparable rates to Oracle NetSuite. It's just that if you can't get a job with Oracle NetSuite, let's say you're 35 and they really have no reason to hire you, then maybe you can get a job with one of these tiny consulting companies. So that is the ballpark range. Again, I would say 10 to 35 is pretty common. So let's just walk through some of the numbers that I've personally seen pretty frequently. And again, those are with some of the more prestigious companies, some of the better consultants in the industry. If we talk about entry level, not too much more. You might see $80,000, because usually these companies aren't hiring entry-level people. They're going to be sticking to people that have some experience from Oracle NetSuite, or minimally they have some really solid business experience, and they're catching up on the actual NetSuite consulting side of things. Then you move up to what can be considered like a mid-level consultant. This is someone who has a few years of experience, but they're by no means at the top of the scale. Those people will generally make, let's say, between $100,000 and $115,000. And then, of course, you move up to your more senior roles, your functional consultants that have been around for a long time, do an excellent job. And those guys can easily make between, I would say, 120 to 150 tends to be the cap for those guys. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, you have these more niche roles like the demoer or the pre-sales consultant, which can get significantly more for those, just because it's such a valuable role to the company. Somebody who can sit down, demo something, and get a close is a very valuable role. So now, in addition to that, you have a few other types of roles, and I first off should comment on independent consultants. So these are people who are not working officially with an organization, they're just on their own. And while I'm sure you can have a million different types of people that become an independent consultant, I've noticed there's two major groupings of them. And neither of them are particularly complementary, but it's just what I tend to see the most. Is either the first grouping is people that really have no business calling themselves consultants. They're people that have very minimal experience, or sometimes none, and they've simply learned a little bit about NetSuite. Maybe they only took my courses. They then are able to kind of talk the lingo, pretend like they have experience, and sometimes they use sites like Upwork or Fiverr, etc., and they try to just kind of claw their way into some kinds of work, which I do appreciate, or I can respect people who are trying to kind of fake it till they make it to get into the career, because it can be hard to break in initially. But at the same time, you can't legitimately call these people consultants when they have very little experience, or sometimes none, doing proper implementations. So that is one category. You often see that with foreign-born people, where just the promise of higher wages is so great that the opportunity to go in as an independent consultant can be very promising. And then the second grouping that I see is consultants who have worked at another company and were just disgruntled. So they maybe got fired, or they didn't agree with their managers or the work schedule or whatever they didn't like about working officially for a company. So they decided, well, I can just do this myself. They go off solo and they just do kind of bit and piece consulting work. And it's kind of funny because when you run the math as an independent consultant, it might seem appealing because, I mean, first off, you kind of run your own show and you could look at it and say, well, if I did 30 billable hours a week and I worked 50 weeks a year and I could easily charge, let's say $150 or $200, well, then I could be looking at $200,000 to $300,000 a year. That looks very promising for people. The reality is it is a total grind. You're having to get your own clients, which is very difficult to do as a non-established company, as an independent consultant. So getting consulting clients is incredibly difficult. Keeping them, oftentimes you're having to give freebie work just to convince people to stay around with you. And it's just hard to be on your own, to be the one-man band that's going to do everything all under one, as opposed to being able to lean on some of your specialist fellow consultants who can help you in certain situations. So I personally think it is a very hard position to be in, but some people, again, they just don't like working for a consulting company. They prefer to be on their own, even if, in my opinion, they're taking a major hit to their pay. And they tend to not be working that much because it's so hard to just keep up with the client acquisition side of things. So that is independent consultants. You can think with that, the pay range on that can be incredibly wild. It really just depends on what the person can pull off, honestly. But I would say it's very, very rare that an independent consultant would make more than a person working at a partner consulting agency. Almost unheard of. Then moving on from that, there are a few additional roles. For example, I've only been talking about functional consultants up until now, but there are, of course, technical consultants like developers. Now, I could go through all the pay ranges for developers, but from what I've experienced and talking to a lot of different developers, I've found that the pay ranges tend to be very comparable to the functional side of things. Maybe you could say that when you get in the mid and the high range, they tend to be slightly higher, like maybe 10% higher for an experienced developer compared to an experienced functional consultant, but they're so comparable that I would just look at the figures I was giving you for Oracle, NetSuite, or one of the partner consulting firms, and then I would just take that as it stands. And then maybe you might look at like a 5 or 10% bump on that, depending on your position. But again, for junior level developers, I wouldn't expect any different. They really tend to land very firmly with those junior level functional consultants. And in some cases, I've even seen them come on at 60,000 because if they have a very limited JavaScript experience and then no business experience, no experience with NetSuite, they're practically useless because they have the worst of all worlds. So those guys can easily get hired at $55,000, $60,000, and they got to work themselves up to 100, 120. But if they're good developers, they can very easily hit those things, especially with those partner consulting companies. Now, there are a lot of other roles that operate within NetSuite, like accounting roles, sales managers, warehouse managers, HR personnel, etc. But when it comes to these roles, it becomes a question not of how experienced you are and how is this going to bump your pay, and more a question of what doors is having some experience with NetSuite going to open for you. If you're an accountant, don't look at learning NetSuite like it's going to give you a big pay bump. Look at it from a standpoint of if you can have certifications in NetSuite and obvious experience with the system, that's going to give you more opportunities for jobs that you wouldn't have otherwise had because you're trying to apply with companies that are already using NetSuite. And if they don't have to onboard you onto the system, that's benefit for them. It makes it a little bit easier. They know you're going to be up and running faster, so they can pick you up and you might then get through that job opportunity or that job interview. So that's how I would think about it if you're falling into any one of those additional roles, is not as a pay enhancement, but as an opportunity opener for different roles and different positions. Maybe you're already in a company that works with NetSuite, but if you can get a little more familiar with it, maybe you can get an even better job or maybe a remote job that pays more or pays comparable, but the circumstances are better for that role. And that's it in terms of the various opportunities and salaries that you may see if you go into a role related to NetSuite. So if you found this video helpful, please hit that like button, subscribe if you want to see more videos like that, and I hope to see you in the next one.